Chances are, if you're here, you're running on empty. You've spent nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, picking apart text messages that keep getting shorter, colder, further apart. You're searching for a sign, waiting for the moment everything becomes clear, and they finally tell you that you're the one. But what if that moment already happened and you missed it because it didn't look anything like what you expected? What if their love didn't look like a grand romantic gesture, but looked instead like a panic attack? What if it looked like a sudden out-of-nowhere fight over nothing? Most relationship advice tells you to watch for consistency, tells you that real love feels safe and warm and predictable. And for someone securely attached, that's generally true. But you're not dealing with someone securely attached. You're dealing with something else entirely, an avoidant knot tangled up inside someone who wants closeness and fears it in equal measure. When you fall for a dismissive or fearful avoidant partner, the whole map gets flipped upside down. North becomes south. Safety starts to feel dangerous. Intimacy starts to feel like a cage closing in. Today we're going to look at a very specific, often terrifying shift, one that shows up in almost every serious relationship with an avoidant partner. It's the exact moment they actually fall for you. And ironically, this is usually the moment their partner assumes it's over and starts walking away. Because when someone avoidant falls in love, they don't lean in the way you'd expect, they glitch. I want you to really sit with what I'm about to explain, because it's going to run against everything your instincts are telling you. We're going to look closely at behaviors that look exactly like rejection on the surface, but are actually agonizing symptoms of real attachment underneath. We're going to examine why they suddenly push you away the second they realize they genuinely can't imagine life without you. They aren't running from you. They're running from the version of themselves that's starting to need you, and that need terrifies them more than losing you ever could. To make sense of this shift, we first have to understand how their silence is built, what it's actually made of. For a dismissive avoidant person, independence isn't just a personality trait or a preference. It's a full-blown survival strategy. It's the air they breathe. Somewhere early in life, they learned that having needs made them vulnerable, that needing someone handed that person power over them, that missing someone was basically admitting weakness. So they built a fortress. Inside that fortress, everything stays tightly controlled. Nobody gets all the way in, and just as importantly, no real emotion is allowed to get out. They exist in a permanent state of emotional self-containment. And then you show up. At first, everything feels easy. The honeymoon phase feels safe precisely because it's still surface level, still chemical, still fantasy. They can play the role of the perfect partner because you haven't actually touched anything real yet. You're a visitor in the fortress, not someone who lives there. But then time moves forward. You start sharing secrets. You build memories together. You become familiar, a source of real comfort. And that's exactly when the glitch happens, when the shift quietly begins. Suddenly, you're not just someone they're casually dating anymore. You've become a threat to the careful equilibrium they've spent years maintaining. You've breached the walls. The first sign of this shift isn't warmth, it's volatility. You might notice them becoming unexpectedly critical out of nowhere. They start picking fights over things that never bothered them before. How you chew, how you dress, the tone of your voice in an ordinary conversation. Your gut tells you they're falling out of love, that they're bored, that the spark is dying. But look closer, because what's actually happening is a deactivation strategy. They're trying, consciously or not, to lower your value in their own mind. Because if you're perfect, if you're everything they've ever wanted, then losing you becomes an unbearable risk, and their brain, wired for survival above all else, cannot allow that kind of exposure. So they try to paint you as flawed. They try to convince themselves you're not actually that special after all. This isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation dressed up as criticism. They're not tearing you down to hurt you. They're tearing you down to protect themselves from the terrifying reality of exactly how much you actually mean to them. Here's the deeper truth you need to understand. They aren't pushing you away because they want you gone. They're pushing you away to test whether the bond between you is strong enough to survive it. Or more tragically, they're pushing you away to control the rejection they've already decided is inevitable. If they break it now, on their own terms, they survive emotionally intact. If they let you fully in and you're the one who eventually leaves, they feel like they'd collapse entirely. And this brings us to a second, even deeper layer of the shift, the freeze. Have you ever had a moment of real, unguarded intimacy with them? Maybe a night where they opened up about something painful, or shared a moment of completely honest, unfiltered laughter. A moment where you thought, finally, we're really here. And then the very next day, they're a ghost. No texts, no calls. And if they do respond, their voice sounds flat, mechanical, distant. This is what's sometimes called a vulnerability hangover, and it hits you just as hard as it hits them. Avoidant individuals often retreat after moments of deep emotional connection because vulnerability activates old fears of being hurt or overwhelmed. Their silence is usually driven by fear rather than indifference, so chasing them often reinforces their instinct to pull away. Fearful avoidants experience an internal push-pull dynamic. They crave love, but fear it at the same time. They may test relationships, seek reassurance indirectly, or sabotage closeness because they expect rejection before it happens. As intimacy grows, they may become overwhelmed by shame and begin focusing on their partner's flaws as a way to protect themselves emotionally. This devaluation is typically a defense mechanism rather than a deliberate attempt to control. It's important to distinguish avoidant behavior from abuse. Healthy explanations never excuse disrespect or mistreatment. An avoidant person often feels genuine guilt after withdrawing and may attempt to reconnect, while lasting relationships require consistent communication, accountability, and mutual effort from both people. The key pattern is inconsistency. Someone who repeatedly alternates between closeness and distance may be struggling with attachment-related fears, whereas someone who is consistently indifferent is more likely simply not emotionally invested. They're stuck in the doorway, too afraid to fully step inside, but too attached to walk away completely. This is the limbo state, and honestly, this is probably where a lot of you are living right now. It's a painful place to exist in, it's a lonely place, but it's also where the real work of a relationship actually happens. We've established what this shift generally looks like, that the pulling away, the sudden coldness, the unexpected criticism are frequently symptoms of love rather than signs of hate. But understanding that doesn't make it hurt any less. Knowing they're scared doesn't make the lonely nights feel any warmer. So what do you actually do? How do you survive this shift without completely losing yourself in the process? And more importantly, how do you help them work through the knot without becoming a casualty of their internal war? We need to talk about the counterintuitive response because your natural instinct is going to be to fix things. When they pull back, you want to lean in harder. When they go quiet, you want to get louder. When they turn cold, you want to set the whole world on fire just to warm them back up. You have to stop doing that. This is probably the hardest thing in this entire conversation for you to actually hear, but you have to stop. You cannot thaw a frozen heart by setting yourself ablaze. You'll only end up burning out completely while they remain just as cold as before. This counterintuitive response requires you to override your own survival instincts, which is genuinely one of the hardest things you'll ever have to learn. When you feel them slipping away, every instinct in your body screams at you to grab hold, to fix it, to explain yourself. But in the world of an avoidant knot, fixing looks exactly like pressure to them. Explaining looks exactly like criticism. Grabbing on looks exactly like a cage closing around them. You have to do the opposite of what feels natural. When they step back, you don't step forward to meet them. You stand completely still. This isn't a manipulative game. This isn't playing hard to get for strategic advantage. This is about respecting their boundary while still holding on to your own dignity in the process. We call this the secure pause. When the shift happens, when they go cold, or pick a fight, or vanish entirely, you engage that secure pause. You don't text them asking what's wrong. You don't write out some lengthy message analyzing their every behavior. You don't apologize for things you never actually did just to smooth things over and keep the peace. You simply wait. And while you're waiting, you have to actively regulate your own nervous system. Because if you're spiraling internally, checking your phone every few minutes, they can feel that anxious energy from across the city in some strange way. It bleeds into the texts you don't even send. Avoidant people tend to be hypervigilant, genuinely skilled at reading emotional atmospheres from a distance. If they sense that you're sitting at home agonizing, waiting for their permission to feel okay again, they'll stay even further away because your anxiety feels like a demand pressing in on them. But if you genuinely redirect your focus elsewhere, hit the gym, spend time with friends, post something online where you're smiling for real, not to spark jealousy, but because you're actually living your life, something in the whole dynamic shifts. The pressure lifts, the vacuum created by your chasing disappears entirely, and in that new space, their curiosity has room to return. The avoidant mind tends to operate on a strange principle, safety through distance. When you're right up in their face, they can't actually see you clearly. All they see is the obligation attached to you. But when you step back and become your own separate person again, they can finally look at you properly. They can remember exactly why they were drawn to you in the first place. They can genuinely miss you. And here's a truth almost nobody tells you outright. Someone avoidant cannot miss you if you never actually leave any space for missing to happen. You have to let them feel that void. You have to let them sit with the actual consequences of their own silence. If they pull away and you immediately flood that silence with texts, you've robbed them of ever feeling the real weight of your absence. You've cushioned their landing for them. Stop cushioning it. Let them feel the cold. Let them come to understand that your warmth isn't some guaranteed utility they can count on like electricity running through the walls. It's a gift. And if they choose to walk away from that gift, things get dark for them, not for you. Now, I already know what you might be thinking. If I stop chasing them, won't they just forget about me and move on entirely? This is the anxious lie your own past pain is whispering to you. They haven't forgotten you. They have what's called object constancy, meaning they know perfectly well that you still exist somewhere in the world. In fact, the moment you actually stop chasing is the exact moment you become most real to them. Because for the first time, you're behaving like someone securely attached. You're signaling genuine self-worth. Avoidant people respect autonomy deeply. They respect strength. When you chase, you inadvertently look weak in their eyes. When you hold your ground instead, you look genuinely valuable, and value is what actually attracts them. So let's talk about what happens when they eventually come back around. Because if you hold that secure pause long enough, they usually will circle back. It might take a few days, it might take a few weeks, but eventually they'll return, often with some kind of test built in. They'll send a low-effort message, something like, "Hey, what's up?" or maybe just a single emoji. This moment is critical, and it's exactly where most people trip up. They're so relieved to finally hear from them that they respond with an overwhelming flood of relief, texting back instantly with something like, "Oh my God, I was so worried, I missed you so much, are we okay?" In doing that, you've just handed all your power right back to them. You've just shown them that no matter how they treat you, you'll still be waiting right by the door like a devoted, patient dog. Don't do that. When they come back with something low effort, match their energy instead. If they say, "Hey, wait a few hours before responding," then send something like, "Hey, good to hear from you. How have things been? Stay polite, stay warm, but don't be desperate about it." You're the anchor here, and an anchor doesn't drift around chasing after the boat. An anchor stays firmly planted in the sand below. You're showing them, through your calm response, that their departure didn't actually destroy you. And precisely because it didn't destroy you, it becomes safe for them to come back around. They don't have to fix you. They just have to be willing to re-enter the relationship, which lowers the barrier significantly for them. But, and this is a genuinely important but, you cannot stay locked in this particular dance forever. We need to talk honestly about the long-term reality here. Understanding why they shift the way they do is an act of compassion. Accepting it indefinitely without any change is a form of self-abandonment. There comes a point where understanding exactly why they keep hurting you doesn't change the fact that you're still bleeding from it. So how do we move from simply surviving the shift to actually healing the relationship dynamic itself? You have to change the entire contract of the relationship, and that happens through what's called secure vulnerability. This is very different from anxiously dumping your emotions onto them all at once. Secure vulnerability looks something like this. You wait for a genuinely calm moment, not while they're actively pulling away, not in the middle of a fight, but a moment of real peace between you. And you say something along these lines: I love the connection we have together. When things are good between us, they're genuinely amazing. But when you disappear for days at a time without any communication at all, it really hurts me. I don't want to change who you fundamentally are, but I also can't thrive in a relationship where I constantly feel shut out. I need us to find some way where you still get the space you need, but I don't end up feeling abandoned in the process. Can we figure that out together? Notice the structure of that message carefully. First, genuine validation. I love the connection between us. Second, a simple fact. When you disappear. Third, the actual impact. It hurts me. Fourth, a clear boundary. I can't thrive like this. Fifth, an open invitation. Can we figure this out together? You're not blaming them outright. You're not telling them they're a bad person. You're simply stating your own needs as plain fact, every bit as valid as their own need for space and independence. Now pay close attention to how they respond, because this becomes the ultimate litmus test. If they explode, if they call you needy or dramatic, if they flatly refuse to even discuss it with you, then you have your answer right there. That's not simple avoidance anymore. That's an outright refusal to grow or change. But if they actually listen, even if they look visibly uncomfortable while doing it, if they stay in the room with you and say something like, I don't really know how to do that, but I'm sorry, that response is genuinely valuable. That's a real glimmer of hope, because it means they value the relationship more than they value clinging to their own defense mechanisms. It means the knot is loose enough to actually be untied over time. But patience is essential here. Nothing about this happens overnight, and an avoidant attachment style was never going to heal in a single conversation. It takes repetition. It takes consistent positive reinforcement. When they do let their guard down, when they open up even slightly, reinforce that moment genuinely. Say things like, I really loved talking with you tonight, or thank you for telling me that, or I feel so close to you right now. Positive reinforcement genuinely helps rewire the brain over time. They've spent their whole life expecting intimacy to eventually lead to pain. You're slowly teaching them that intimacy can actually lead to safety instead. You're essentially retraining a nervous system that's been wired for isolation since childhood, and it's worth pausing to consider just how massive that task actually is. You're up against ghosts from decades ago, the parent who wasn't emotionally present, the parent who was constantly critical, the first love who betrayed their trust completely. You're fighting an entire legion of old ghosts, and you cannot fight ghosts like that with anger. You can only fight them with steady, unwavering consistency. Consistency is really the true antidote to avoidance. Not consistency in chasing them down, but consistency in simply who you are, day after day. Think of yourself as a lighthouse. A lighthouse doesn't run frantically up and down the beach, searching for ships that have gone missing. A lighthouse simply stands firmly on its rock and shines its light steadily outward. If a ship genuinely wants to be saved, it will find its way toward that light on its own. If the ship chooses to stay lost in the storm instead, that becomes the ship's own tragedy, not a failure on the lighthouse's part. I really need you to internalize that distinction. You are not responsible for someone else's healing journey. You're only responsible for the environment you create around them. Is that environment safe? Is it warm? Is it consistent over time? If the honest answer is yes, and they still can't manage to dock safely, then the real issue is something structural within them, not a failure on your end. Let's go a little deeper into the psychology behind that glitch I mentioned earlier. Why does falling in love actually feel like a panic attack for someone like this? It largely comes down to a fear of losing themselves entirely. To a dismissive, avoidant person, their sense of self is like a carefully constructed island, and they've spent their entire life fortifying its borders. Real intimacy requires a kind of merging, lowering the drawbridge and letting someone else in fully. When they start to feel themselves genuinely merging with you, it can feel like they're dissolving completely. It can feel, quite literally, like a kind of dying. That's exactly why the shift feels so aggressive when it happens. It's a fight for their own survival, at least as their nervous system understands it. If I truly love you, where does that leave me as an individual? If we genuinely become an us, what happens to who I was before? They simply don't know that healthy interdependence exists as a real option. They only know two settings: total isolation that feels safe, or total enmeshment that feels suffocating. And so they end up projecting that fear of suffocation onto you specifically. They start to believe somewhere deep down that you want to consume them entirely. So the next time you see them pulling away, try reframing it internally like this: they aren't fighting against me. They're fighting for air. That single reframe genuinely changes everything about how the moment feels. It takes the sting out of what feels like personal rejection. It turns your anger into something closer to compassion. And compassion operates at a much lower, calmer energy frequency than anger does. It feels less threatening to them. When you look at someone with compassion instead of demand, they can actually feel that shift. The pressure drops. And when the pressure finally drops, they can breathe again. And when they can breathe, they're able to move closer to you once more. I want to touch on something else that plays a huge role in this shift, what we might call the Phantom X. Often, right as they're pushing you away, they'll suddenly bring up a past partner out of nowhere, or start romanticizing some old relationship. My ex never asked this much of me. I still think about her sometimes, even now. That kind of comment cuts deep. It makes you feel like you're somehow second best. But let me decode what's actually happening here. They're not genuinely in love with that ex. They're in love with the distance that ex now represents. The ex feels safe precisely because the ex is gone, no longer capable of asking for anything real. The ex has become a kind of fantasy they can fully control inside their own mind. You, on the other hand, are real. You're right here, present, sometimes demanding, occasionally messy, exactly like any real relationship is. They use that Phantom X almost like a shield to keep you at a comfortable distance. I can't fully commit to you because I'm not completely over her, they might say. But that's usually a lie they're telling themselves as much as you. They're using a ghost to avoid dealing with someone actually alive and present in front of them. Don't waste your energy competing with that ghost. You'll lose every time, because the ghost is inherently perfect in their memory. The ghost never has a bad day. The ghost never becomes annoying or difficult. Instead, gently call it out for what it is. You can say something like, I understand you have real history there, but I'm here right now, and I want to build something real with you. If you'd rather live in the past, I can't stop you from doing that, but you'd be missing out on what's actually happening in front of you right now. Put the choice firmly back in their hands. Avoidant people generally hate feeling controlled, but they respond well to feeling genuinely empowered to choose for themselves. Give them that choice directly. I want to be with you, but only if you genuinely want to be here too. This isn't an ultimatum dressed up as something else. It's simply a clear standard you're holding for yourself. Now we're arriving at the final and probably most important part of all this. What happens if you do everything right? What if you become the anchor? What if you give them all the space they need? What if you stay secure, loving, and endlessly patient, and they still, despite all of it, can't make the shift back towards you? This is the reality check that has to happen eventually. Sometimes the knot really is too tight. Sometimes the underlying trauma runs too deep to unravel within the context of your particular relationship. And sometimes the most loving thing you can possibly do, both for them and for yourself, is to walk away entirely. But here's the crucial difference in how that walking away happens. You don't leave in anger. You don't leave as some kind of punishment aimed at them. You leave because you've come to accept reality as it actually is. I love you, but I cannot love you into wellness on my own. And I cannot keep setting myself on fire just to keep you warm indefinitely. Sometimes leaving is genuinely the catalyst an avoidant person needs to finally wake up to their own patterns. Think of it as their own rock bottom moment of loneliness. As long as you're still there, quietly tolerating whatever small crumbs of connection they offer, they have no real incentive to change anything about themselves. They get to keep your love while also keeping every one of their walls fully intact. It's the best of both worlds for them at your expense. But when you finally remove your love from the equation, when the lighthouse actually goes dark, that's when they're left completely alone inside the fortress they spent their whole life building. And it's genuinely cold in there without anyone else around. A lot of avoidant people only begin any real healing journey after they've lost someone who truly and deeply loved them. It's often that regret, that loss, that finally cracks through the shell they've spent years constructing. So don't view walking away as some kind of personal failure on your part. View it instead as the final, most difficult act of love you can offer. You're loving yourself enough to finally leave when you need to, and you're loving them enough in your own way to let them face the consequences of their own choices on their own terms.